Good morning, Four Oaks Church. It is Thursday. Continues to be chilly. I think it's the 29th. Yes, Thursday, January 29th, 2026. Thanks for joining us for this installment of our pastoral devotionals. We are working our way through the book of James. And this week we are camping out in James 2, verses 1 through 13. And the issue is partiality. That is showing favoritism towards one person or towards one group over another based on things that are important to us as humans, that divide us as humans, things like socioeconomic status and age and ethnicity and class and wealth and who's in, who's out, good looks, all of those sorts of things. And of course, James has been telling us that this strikes at the heart of God because God is an impartial God, as Deuteronomy 32 tells us. He is not a respecter of persons. Man looks on the outward appearance, God looks on the heart. The only thing that matters to God is a broken and contrite spirit. He will not despise that. That is God's central concern, is the life that is set apart to him, and everything else matters not. Okay, in terms of partiality. Now, James has walked us through that principle. He's even given us an illustration. But as we're going to see this morning, then James pulls a principle out of this that is a little befuddling, head scratching, and we want to understand what he means, because he goes from teaching to preaching, from fiddling to meddling. And let's read the whole passage here, 1 through 13. This, of course, is the passage we're preaching on this upcoming Sunday. Let's continue to dig into it together. My brothers, show no partiality as you hold the faith in our Lord Jesus Christ, the Lord of glory. For if a man wearing a gold ring and fine clothing comes into your assembly, and a poor man in shabby clothing also comes in, and if you pay attention to the one who wears the fine clothing and say, you sit here in a good place, while you say to the poor man, you stand over there or sit down at my feet, have you not then made distinctions among yourselves and become judges with evil thoughts? Listen, my beloved brothers, has not God chosen those who are poor in the world to be rich in faith and heirs of the kingdom, which he has promised to those who love him? But you have dishonored the poor man. Are not the rich the ones who oppress you and the ones who drag you into court? Are they not the ones to blaspheme the honorable name by which you were called? If you really fulfill the royal law according to the scripture, you shall love your neighbor as yourself, you are doing well. But if you show partiality, you are committing sin and are convicted by the law as transgressors. For whoever keeps the whole law but fails in one point has become guilty of all of it. For he who said, do not commit adultery, also said, do not murder. If you do not commit adultery but do murder, you have become a transgressor of the law. So speak and so act as those who are to be judged under the law of liberty. For judgment is without mercy to one who has shown no mercy. Mercy triumphs over judgment. We are totally fine with this illustration, right? This illustration of a rich man and then a poor man walking into the church. We treat the rich man better than the poor man simply because of who they are and what they have and what they can give us, and et cetera, et cetera. And we have no problem saying that is wrong. Bad rich man. Where it gets interesting is James then doesn't leave it there. He actually goes on to pull a principle out of this that is pretty critically important and important for us not to skip over. He says in verse 5, listen, my beloved brothers, has not God chosen those who are poor in the world to be rich in faith and heirs of the kingdom, which he has promised to those who love him? And here it's very clear he's not talking about simply being poor in spirit, right? We know that the hallmark of a believer, the one who wants to be treated impartially before God, is the one with the pure hands, clean heart, right? One who is repentant, one who is humble, one who is poor in spirit, who knows they deserve no mercy but receive it. by the sheer grace and mercy of God. But that's not what James is talking about here, because he goes on to note, are not the rich the ones who oppress you? What is James saying here? Well, first of all, let's start with the rich part and what he's saying there. They are showing in this hypothetical example favoritism to the rich. And James, in essence, is taking that hypothetical and extrapolating it and saying, hey, why do you guys want to be so partial to the rich anyway? Are not they the ones who are exploiting you? Are not they the ones, the class of rich? Are they not the ones taking you to court? Are they not the ones exploiting you? Why would you want to be a part of that kind of group? Okay, and here, this would be the equivalent of being the nerd in high school and trying desperately to please the in crowd and do the things the in crowd wants you to do in order to be accepted. And it's kind of not really working, right? I mean, they take advantage of your generosity to them, the in crowd. They'll use you to help them cheat on their test or lie for them for teachers or parents. But when it comes down to it, you're just not one of them. And it would be like that person trying to wedge their way so insecurely into the in crowd, and their parents pulling them to the side and say, why in the world would you want to be a part of that group so desperately? They're the ones who laugh at you behind your back. They're the ones who know how needy you are. They're the ones who are trying to take advantage of you. That's essentially what James is saying. He's saying, in this hypothetical situation, you're giving preference to this class of people. Why would you want to be a part of that class of people? It's for all the wrong reasons. Okay, so I think that's what James is saying there. But what he really says that should get our attention, he says, has not God chosen those who are poor in the world to be rich in faith and heirs of the kingdom? Does God have special favor for the poor? And this is a great question. And I think there's three things that we can say about God's relationship to the poor, the economically downtrodden, the social outcast. Okay, I pulled up a few little verses here to help us. God has a special love and care for the downtrodden, precisely because they are the ones who are in most desperate of need. In other words, God sees their plight economically, socially, and otherwise, and he's not hardened by that. He has compassion for that. His heart yearns for that person. So here's a verse, okay? Psalm 41. Blessed is he that considers the poor. Blessed is he that considers the poor. The Lord will deliver him in time of trouble, and the Lord will preserve him, and the Lord will keep him alive, and he shall be blessed upon the earth. Psalm 68:10. O God, thou hast prepared of thy goodness, this is from the King James Version, for the poor. Okay. Psalm 72:4. He shall judge the poor of the people. He shall save the children of the needy and break in pieces the oppressor. Also Psalm 72. He shall deliver the needy when he cries, the poor also in him that has no helper. He shall spare the poor and needy and save the souls of the needy. We could go on and on and on. This is a requisite for genuine faith. This is what James has just told us last week in our passage in James 1, that the true believer cannot look at the poor and be hardened. Right, then that might be an indication that the grace of God is not operative there. But God himself has a special place in his heart for them, precisely because of their plight. This is why, okay, and this gets to point number 2, it is the poor who more clearly and easily see their need for Jesus and for grace. So when you look at, for example, the ministry of Jesus, who was it that was particularly drawn to him? It was the poor, the needy, and the outcast. Those who had none, prostitutes, those who were poor, those who had been shunned by the rest of society. We see this also, do we not, in the history of the church, that one of the things that distinguished the early church was its severe poverty. And it was a a badge of shame for them in the wider culture that there was such a ragtag group of people clinging together because the poor were disdained so much. But we see, in fact, do we not, that the church's heart is animated for the poor in Jerusalem. Paul's taking up this collection. The very thing that he was eager to do was to help those in need by taking collection for Jewish Christians from Gentile Christians. We see that in Jerusalem during a time of great need, there were the Hebraic Jews and the Hellenistic Jews. And already the church had this system going where they were caring for widows and the poor and those who had no need. Now, important to understand that there were many rich people, right, tied to the ministry of Jesus and the early church. In fact, it was the rich people helping to take care of the poor people. See, that's part of one of the reasons that wealth is not inherently bad. It's a gift from God used to his glory. And we see people like Joseph of Arimathea, Nicodemus, the family of Lazarus. These were all wealthy patrons of Jesus in his earthly ministry. Paul, so people like Lydia, people Philemon. These were all people who housed the church in their homes. They generated hospitality and they gave and they were incredibly generous. And so certainly the scriptures show us many examples of wealthy believers who were helping to supply the needs of the church, and that is a good thing. So that's not what James is speaking of here. What he's speaking of here is this idea that, number one, God has particularly compassion on the poor. Number two, the church historically has been populated by a disproportionate number of poor and needy, mainly because they see their need for grace more acutely. They understand their needs. That's why, remember when Jesus says it's harder for a rich man to enter heaven than a camel pass through an eye of a needle, because it's very difficult, harder to have our eyes open to our true need when we have our riches and money to fall back to. But I think there's one final reason too, that God particularly delights in casting mercy and grace upon the poor, and it has to do with the nature of the gospel itself. Okay. 1 Corinthians 1:18. For the word of the cross is folly to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved, it is the power of God. For it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, and the discernment of the discerning I will thwart. Where is the one who is wise? Where is the scribe? Where is the debater? Has God not made foolish the wisdom of the world? For since in the wisdom of God, the world did not know God through wisdom, it pleased God through the folly of what we preach to save those who believe. And then he goes on to remind them who they were, these Corinthians. For consider your calling, brothers. Not many of you were wise. Not many were powerful, of noble birth. But God chose what is foolish in the world to shame the wise. God chose what is weak in the world to shame the strong. See, the world looks at the poor and disdains them because they believe they can offer nothing. And what pleases God is to take the poor and needy and to confound the wisdom and pride of the world, and to show that true power, true life is found in the poverty of spirit. And again, it's the poor in material things that as a general rule have an easier time of seeing their need for the grace of Jesus Christ. And so James isn't content simply to say, be nice to one another. He wants to remind us what the heart of the Lord is, right? Not just to the poor, yes, to them certainly, but to everyone who calls upon his name. That's the principle. Now, tomorrow, on Friday, we will look at some of the practical outworkings from all of these things James has been talking about in terms of what it means to actively love our neighbor. So instead of being partial towards one's group, we want to be impartial. That's good, but proactively, what does that mean in the life of the believer? That's where we're heading tomorrow, and we'll see you then. Let me pray. Father, Remind us today of our own poverty of spirit. Remind us today that you have particular points of compassion for the needy, the downtrodden, and those who have no advocate for them. And so, Father, remind us of that. Give us your grace. And